Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody out in social media land. Welcome to Taboo Talk with Ray and Steve. I'm Ray Amanat, based out of Port Richey, Florida, in my home studios, and my co-host in an undisclosed location somewhere out in northern Texas is Mr. Steve Reed.
Buenos dias, senor.
Oh yeah, you got to be speaking that. The more illegals that keep coming over to your border.
Yeah, but we're figuring out how to transport them or relocate them. So, how's Ray doing today?
I'm not doing too bad. I'm excited for our top. Well, I'm not excited for a topic because it's a serious topic, but I'm excited to talk to our guest about it. For our viewers, today's episode of Taboo Talk covers one of the most avoided topics that we have covered, as not a lot of people want to discuss suicide. All the images that you saw in our intro are images that actually can lead to suicide, believe it or not. Joining us today is a friend that I've met here in Florida at, among of all things, a networking meeting. Tammy White is the founder of the Bobby White Foundation, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping people learn how to talk about suicide and why it is so important to have a discussion, but in a way that won't keep someone from bottling up their emotions in an unhealthy manner. Tammy, welcome to Taboo Talk
Howdy,
with Ray and
Tammy.
Steve.
Glad
Hey,
you're here.
Steve. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having the courage to open up to this subject.
Well, I heard you speak at our networking meeting here in Florida, and I'm like, I got to get you on the show.
Yeah, that was off the cuff. He came to me like 5 minutes before. Tammy, can you talk for 10 minutes? I'm like, yeah.
So, can you give our viewers a little background about yourself and what the Bobby White Foundation is?
Sure. I started the Bobby White Foundation as a nonprofit. We are a 501c3 in July of 2018. The premise initially was to help suicide loss survivors. You always hear about the prevention side of suicide, but what happens after a suicide? What happens to those people afterwards? And there wasn't, I guess I should, if I go into a little bit more about me, then you'll understand why. In April of 2016, I lost my husband of nearly 30 years to suicide. That's when we found out that there was just, it's hard to find resources and help for loss survivors. You don't know what to do or to turn. There's such a stigma and a taboo attached to suicide. When my husband died, before the first responders left, an officer, a deputy, knelt down in front of me. They handed me a piece of paper, and the piece of paper had a list of funeral homes on it. And this officer said to me, I patrol this area all the time. If you ever need anything, please call me. I'll be right here. Well, I've been in business in this community for, at that time, I don't know, 23 years, something like that. And so my natural instinct was, do you have a card? I need a name and a phone number. Who am I going to contact? And I just remember looking at him and him looking up at me, and he pointed to his name on his shirt. And he said, no, but this is my name. And I just remember looking at him and thinking to myself, I just came home 4 hours ago and found my husband hanging from a tree. And you expect me to remember your name? I didn't say it. I mean, that's what was in my head. And I just remember him getting up and walking away. And to this day, I cannot tell you what this deputy's name was. I can't tell you even what he looked like. I have no clue. And that started my journey, my family's journey into this horrible epidemic that we have of suicide.
Man, Tammy, I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
It's never something pleasant to talk about when you have those sorts of things. As a life coach and executive coach, more on the life coaching side, I've had to deal with that a little bit with some of my clients when they're dealing with the loss themselves. But okay, so the police officer knelt down, gave you a list of the funeral homes in the area, and then
That was it.
he's pretty much done. He pretty much washed his hands and says,
All the
I'm outta here."
officers, all the victims advocates, everybody, they walked away, and that was it.
So, okay, I've seen, and we'll talk through this as we're going through the program, but there are a lot of resources for suicide prevention. But what I'm gathering is there's nothing in a safety net for people like yourself and your family that they have gone through the loss.
Back then, I mean, it's been 6.5 years since I lost Bobby. And at that time, there really wasn't. I mean, we have a national organization, but they really were not equipped per se to, they have a program where they can send out somebody that's kind of like a peer that has been trained and who has suffered a similar loss to speak with you. But when I reached out to them, they didn't have anybody that had lost a spouse or a partner. I was sent a gal who lost her only son, which her and I are now really great friends, but our losses were different. And you feel those losses a lot differently.
Sure.
So there are resources for lost survivors. When we lost Bobby, was pretty much not there. Even when we started the foundation 2 years later, there were still resources were scarce and very hard to come by. I do have to say, and maybe COVID had a lot to do with it, I don't know, but in the last, I would say maybe the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, more and more resources have become available, which I love to see. I mean, we partner with other community
Sure.
partners, because my foundation, we were probably the first in the United States formed to address the lost side, the survivor side. There is a large organization out of Australia that started this many years prior to us. But in the United States, we were the first ones. And we're getting more resources. And sometimes people are beginning to talk about it more. When I first started speaking publicly about what happened to us, it was about 1.5 years after we lost Bobby. And I remember the first time and the first several times after that when I'd get up in front of the room and people would find out what I was going to talk about, you could feel the energy in the room change. You can see the expressions on the people's faces change,
Sure.
And not in a good way. I mean, this isn't a subject a lot of people want to talk about or hear about, and especially usually at 8:30 in the morning. But every single time from the very beginning, somebody comes up to me afterwards and thanks me and tells me their story. And I had a minister come up to me. Actually, it was the last talk that organization I was at before COVID shut down, like the next day. And he was a minister, and he had lost his son, like, I don't know, 16 years prior to that. And he hadn't talked about it in 16 years.
Yeah.
You know, the first time I spoke, 3 people came up to me afterwards and told me their stories. And all 3 of them I had known for several years and never knew.
So, Tammy, I assume this is the cover page for the Bobby White Foundation.
Yes.
So
that's our logo.
What was the prompting for you to actually start the foundation?
To help people like us. my husband was a wonderful guy. He really was. One of the gals, he was a land surveyor, and he surveyed for over 40 years. And one of the gals in his office, when we lost Bobby, she said that out of everybody in the office, he was the last one that they ever thought this would happen to. He was always the one who came into the office that was happy. If people were down or something was going wrong, he would, he was the one to, to lift everybody up and change everybody's, kind of attitude from being, kind of melancholy to, hey, look, let's go do this. Let's get this done. He was a great guy. Very handsome from what all the ladies tell me. I thought so too, but he was just a good guy. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 25 years prior to this. We weren't married at the time. We got married a couple of years after his diagnosis. And, but MS is a progressive disease. You don't get better from it. We were extremely fortunate through the 25 years that he had been diagnosed that he was still working at the time of his death. And, being a land surveyor is a very physical job. But he loved it. He loved being outside. And I just couldn't let my pain, our family's pain, other people going through what we've had to go through with no help. It's like being thrown into a pond full of alligators. And he was a great guy, and I just couldn't let his life be for nothing. I don't tell too many people about it, but it's going to start being incorporated in our story a little bit more. But I've always wanted to do something like this, but this wasn't the plan. My first husband was also a land surveyor, and I took him to work one day and never saw him again. He was killed on the job. And back then I was 26 years old. I wanted to do something to bring awareness to our road workers. On the road, people drive by and they get all mad because to them it's an inconvenience that these people are trying to do something to make their travel better or whatever. And back then I was really young and, didn't really know what to do. Got a whole lot of backlash from the guys in the survey community. And so I never did. And, but every day Bobby went to work, I lived with that too, knowing that he might not come home one day because I've already lived that. But fortunately, we had almost 30 years together. It just ended differently.
Tammy, just listening to you speak, and looking at your website as well, I'm getting an echo here.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback.
Looking at your website, and you were talking about having more resources for people that, suicides are different stories. And with what we do, Steve being a coach and me being somebody that has dealt with severe bullying, and at one point in my life, I had thought about suicide myself. And I know that there are kids that are out there that are severely bullied that want to commit suicide. I'm not going to speak on Steve's behalf, but I would love to be an added resource on your website for families that are dealing with severe bullying and their child is hurting themselves. And if there's anything that I can do to help them have more self-esteem and confidence, I would love to be on your website to be a resource for people.
I'm sure we can arrange that.
Okay. And, most people do find it hard to talk about suicide. Can you get into why that is?
Well, first off, what I want to say is because we had a little bit of conversation before. One of the first things that we need to do is change the narrative. We need to change the verbiage from committed suicide to died by suicide. Our loved ones didn't commit a crime. It's not a crime in the Bible. It's never says anywhere that suicide is a crime. When you commit something, you usually commit a crime. Our loved ones died by suicide. It's no different than dying from cancer, Alzheimer's, or any other illness. And, unfortunately, it's just the way our society has been probably, for decades, hundreds of years, whatever. But we need to change the verbiage from committed suicide to died by suicide. Still, a lot of clinicians use the term. And for us living that really closely, it's painful. And that's one thing that's going to help. But people need to be open to talking. Talking about it is not going to make somebody take their life. That is a myth. If you know somebody and you see some of the signs, or you think you do, don't be afraid to say something. I always tell people, I would rather have somebody mad at me for thinking they might be, wanting to hurt themselves or take their lives than having to go to their funeral. You don't want to live this life. And I can say that for a couple ways. It happened in our own family. My brother-in-law attempted to take his life 2 years prior to Bobby. The adults in our family, in our immediate family, knew about it, except for Bobby and I. We didn't know. And I even directly asked his wife one time in a phone call if he would intentionally hurt himself. He had been committed to the local VA psych ward for several weeks. And she knew what I was talking about, because many, many years ago, she lost her first husband to suicide and left her with 5 small young children. But she told me, oh no, Tammy, he would never do anything like that. 2 years later, Bobby is the exact same age as his brother. Bobby takes his life. And I always still had in the back of my mind about what happened to his brother. And so about 5 months after Bobby died, I was in my kitchen with his youngest sister, who's a couple years older than me. Actually, I was up on crutches with a cast on my leg. I severely broke my leg 3 months later. But I directly asked her again, and she finally told me the truth, that yes, he tried to take his life. His wife came home, found him on the couch with a rope wrapped around his neck. The beam in the garage broke. But for some reason, they didn't think it was important to tell his brother or I that this happened. Now, whether or not that would have made a difference in our outcome, maybe, maybe not. More likely, probably not. But guess what? I never got that opportunity. I never had the knowledge. I didn't have the choice because I didn't know, because we weren't told.
Yeah. Tammy, that is horrendous to have to go through those things. There's a whole grieving process that we have to go through, but seeing the signs, can it be prevented? We need to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you and have you maybe share some insights on possible prevention mechanisms and possibly some of the grieving things. So, Ray, take us down the road of heroes in action. And I know you do some things with self-esteem with people. How can that play into some of the things that we're talking about? So, talk to us about heroes in action.
So, heroes in action, it's your actions that make you a hero. And just like Tammy talks about, that action of asking a question, are you hurting yourself or are you suicidal? If that action of asking a question leads to more awareness and getting the right kind of help that that person needs, then that in a way makes you their hero. I've written a series of books, children's books, to gently introduce sensitive topics, so that parents or teachers can read those books. That action of reading the book helps the child with problem solving and critical thinking, so that they can handle problems and not be overwhelmed or deal with anxiety that can lead to potential suicide. Our goal is in teaching violence prevention. Any type of bullying, whether it's childhood bullying, sexual harassment at work, or maybe your spouse is the bully, physically, mentally, emotionally bullying you. We want to help people overcome fears so that they know what to say, they know what to do, they know how to handle it to avoid being a victim of other people or in a way of themselves. We have programs for kids, programs for families, and dealing with workplace violence programs. Uh, Things that can happen at the workplace could be a domestic issue between a husband and wife or a boyfriend girlfriend, or it could also be your active shooter that comes on play. I do have a mascot, which is Mushy the Martian, that goes to a lot of our events, trade shows, festivals. And when we do our presentations for kids on anti bullying, Mushy will typically come out at the end of the presentation and be introduced. So, the best way to get a hold of us, you can always reach me on my cell at that number, 314-570-0243. Email me at ray@heroesinactionnow.org. You can go to I have a YouTube page that has bunches of videos that you can follow to learn how to physically protect yourself. You can purchase our books through Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and the books that you purchase, that money goes towards helping fund our organization to continue offering what we do for free. Making a donation to Heroes in Action also enables us to travel and continue doing what we do for communities that might not have the resources or the funding to pay for the services that you would get at a karate school or another self-defense school. We want to make it to where there's no fees involved.
And if I'm not mistaken, Ray, you've got a program set up where if you get 4,000 people contributing is it $5 a month? Is that all it is?
Just $5 a month recurring, and that enables us to go anywhere in the country and provide our services with all the handouts, t-shirts, hero capes, and everything for
Outstanding.
free.
Outstanding.
For free.
Thank you,
Yes.
Ray. All right, let's bring Tammy back in. Tammy, so are there two questions here? Number one, are there ways for us to spot some of the things, some of those signs that we need to be aware of what's going on, but also the things that we can do to help people in the grieving process? So really kind of a two-part question for you.
Sure. Yeah, there are signs. Even with us, I guess there were signs in hindsight, but you don't know what you don't know, I guess. But some things that you can look for is talking about wanting to die, or talking about suicide when typically that's not a conversation per se. Someone feeling hopeless, desperate, or trapped. If somebody starts giving away their prized possessions, it is a sign. Putting their affairs in order, and that's part of giving away their stuff. Also, other signs can be reckless behavior, anger, Um, maybe some stupid little thing which wouldn't typically make somebody angry will just really set them off. Another one which is very, very typical is increased drug or alcohol abuse, withdrawing from people, because it's easier to do something if nobody is aware and you're not around people. Anxiety, and with the teens, the young adults these days, that's really big, especially when it comes to bullying. The majority of the teen suicides these days are due to bullying. We had a young girl just at the beginning of school, just prior to school starting her senior year, took her life. Again, not somebody that you would typically think would do it, but evidently there had been bullying involved. The proper people were, I guess, alerted, but nothing happened. Sudden mood changes in sleep, somebody not having a sense of purpose. The thing is if you see any of these signs, the thing is just not to just blow it off or be afraid to say something to somebody, because it could just be that, one thing, are you okay? Are you thinking about this, or, anything that could be the one thing to stop somebody from taking their life. They've done a lot of interviews and have a lot of statistics with people who have attempted, and pretty much every single one of them have said that they really didn't want to die. They just wanted the pain to stop. Now, there's a big push for zero suicide. That's unrealistic. It's never going to happen. I would like for it to be that way, but it's not. It just is not realistic. So we need to work within these perimeters and help people and let people know. Don't be afraid to talk about it. I know probably people get tired of hearing me, but you don't want to walk in my shoes either. If I would have thought that my husband was going to do what he did in a 2-hour time span of me running errands, looking back on some things that he said prior to, I would have never left him that day. But I didn't know. And the thing is too, with the zero suicide, granted, there are a lot of suicides that can be prevented, but we're not going to stop it all.
Yeah.
Like with my husband, if he didn't take his life that day, he very possibly would have done it another day.
Yeah.
And it's not that it hasn't happened. It's a reality.
Yeah. So Tammy, there are some other signs or other external forces that may be the impetus for somebody taking their life. Things like a job loss, maybe postpartum depression, other types of depression, all of the stuff that's going on. I know suicide rates have gone up over the past couple of years with the whole COVID thing.
Yes, it has.
I know one of the resources that you shared, or that's on your website, is talking about youth suicide, teen suicide prevention that is related to the LGBT community. So there are a lot of different things. So are there the big things like job loss or like a divorce, like a loss of a child, those kinds of things? Are those some red flags that we need to watch out for as well?
Any traumatic change, life-changing event,
okay,
it could be a catalyst. It depends on the person and their state of mind. Quite often, job loss, divorce.
Yep.
With my brother-in-law, I believe it was, he lost a job that he had for 20 years. divorce.
Yeah.
Quite often is a catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any major trauma could be a catalyst.
Yeah.
The thing is, suicide does not discriminate.
So it's, whether it's like you have gold star families where somebody loses a family member while they were serving our country, and family members can't handle that's a catalyst. One of the things that is also not talked about, but is always shown on TV shows, on commercials, where if you take this drug, here's some of the side effects, and a lot of the side effects.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No.
The most common one is suicide.
I know.
Why would anyone take a drug where a side effect can be suicide?
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. My husband and I used to watch those commercials because, like I said, he had multiple sclerosis, and we never put him on conventional medication. Back when he was first diagnosed, there was only one drug available, and it was really expensive, and he had to give himself a shot in the stomach, I don't know, at least a couple times a week. And this was back in the late 80s, and at the time, the drug was $1,000 a month. And that was just for the drug. That didn't count. He needed syringes, he needed, alcohol to clean, everything else that he needed to administer it. And we had a really cool neurologist at the time, and he told us, he said, he goes, this drug is going to make you sicker than you are now for at least 3 months, and there's no guarantee that you'll be better after that. Well, at the time, like I said, he was a land surveyor, and at the time, he was in the midst of, we had just found out what was wrong with him. It took us 6 months to find out what was going on. He couldn't hardly walk or stand up. He was having problems with his eyesight. Thankfully, that came back. There was a period of time he couldn't drive. But we told the neurologist, it was like, we need to go and home and talk about this. And we came back and we told him that we just didn't think it was for us. And we changed our diet. I mean, we ate pretty healthy anyways, but all through the years, I would go to these seminars, and they were typically put on by the drug companies. And everybody there, for the most part, had MS, had been diagnosed, and a lot of them for years, and they were on one drug or another. But yet physically, every single one of them were in worse shape than my husband. He had about 2 years in the beginning where he couldn't work. And then he fought through it. He had relapsing remitting MS. And there was a period with vitamins and healthy eating, we had him in complete remission for 7 years. But again, it's a progressive disease. You're never going to get better from it. But and I've had this conversation with my in-laws, that we totally believe that if we would have put him on any of those drugs back then, we would have lost him long before we lost him.
I agree, because you just never know. So, Tammy, what programs does your foundation offer, and how are you a part of some of those programs?
Okay, well, our first program we started right off the get-go. We got our first grant funding our first year. We worked with Central Florida Children's and Family Systems of Care for our Purple Folder program. And our Purple Folder, it took about 2.5 years to develop. And it's a folder to give. That's our volunteer, Diane. She's a great help. It's a purple folder that's full of information, kind of like what we wish we would have had when we lost Bobby. There's a letter in there from me, and just a bunch of resources and information. The idea is to get it into the hands of lost survivors as soon after a death as possible. It doesn't have to be right after, and they may not be ready for it at the time, but at least when they're ready for information, you have something in your hand. You don't have to go searching or trying to find something, because it's difficult to find. Um, we have handed out almost 500 of these in 3 years. We've mailed them across the United States. We revise them about once a year, so we're getting ready to do a new revision here shortly. And we started, our first year was with Central Florida, and then the idea was after the first year, the foundation would completely take it over. So it's programmed completely, the foundation's program. We're also starting a new program. We're gonna rename it. We haven't cued in on like a really good name yet, but the program's idea is to help loss survivors in a number of ways, helping to find resources for counseling, or maybe they need to go to the gym and they can't afford it. You know, beating on a gym bag to get your frustrations out when you're going through this can be very cathartic. You know, we have several community partners that we're working with to offer services, handyman services. And just as an example, recently, one of our families, the mom, I think she has 2 other adult children. She lost her 26-year-old son a couple of years ago, and she hasn't been taking good care of herself. She hasn't been eating properly, and she ended up in the hospital for 6 days. And basically now she is possibly in congestive heart failure from just not taking care of herself. And so we were able to go to Publix and get her healthy, real food and deliver it to her. Easy stuff to cook, but healthy, natural food. All she was eating was processed foods. And like I said, it ended her up in the hospital for 6 days, and now she's doing follow-up because of her heart. And that's one thing that I found out too. It is a real thing, dying from a broken heart. Stress from losing a loved one, especially in this matter, is very hard on your heart, not only emotionally, but physically, if you do not take care of yourself.
You know, Tammy, there are a lot of stressors that we have out there, and the emotional things that we're dealing with on a regular basis, they can definitely cause a lot of depression. There can be things like we've talked already, job loss, divorce, etc., those kinds of things. And that can lead to the ultimate level of depression, and that is taking one's life.
We talk about it a lot on our show. We have a streaming TV show called Hope in the Light of Suicide. That's one of our other programs that we started. Actually, it came about because of COVID, because we couldn't go out and speak to people. And it actually took my producer about 10 months to talk me into doing the show, because I typically like being on the back side of the camera, not in front of the camera. But my co-host, Bonnie, she is also a loss survivor. She lost her 14-year-old grandson to suicide 3 years ago, and then 6 months later lost her youngest adult child to a drug overdose, but it could have been a suicide also. And her and I talk openly every week about grief and depression and what we're going through and how to help people, and just to let people know that you're not alone in this. You don't have to go through this on your own. We talk real. I don't know if it's a good habit or a bad habit, but I talk real. I cannot sugarcoat it, because that's a lot of the reason why we're in the state that we're in, is because nobody wants to be real about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, like I said, you know, from personal experience, silence kills. Being quiet kills.
Yeah.
So Tammy, we have to pay another bill, and part of that, what we do is try to help people. Sounds like diet, nutrition, everything can be a good facet for helping with depression. But Steve, you got something else that you use that can help people. Can you talk to people about it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ray. I signed up with a company about 9 months ago. The company is LifeWave. They're based in California, but they've got locations literally around the globe, in 80, 90 countries around the world. And what they do is they focus on science, specifically light-based science. And they originally started by developing a program with a transdermal patch. It's just a little wafer thin patch that you put on your body that helped to enhance the energy level for Navy SEALs. And then they developed some other things, and some of those other things were related to the Olympics and more energy related things. But most recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, the founder of the company, David Schmidt, had a major breakthrough. And this breakthrough actually, the similar patch, it actually, you put it on your body and it stimulates your stem cells to go back to work. By the time we reach the age 60, our stem cells have pretty much all gone dormant. 90% of our stem cells have gone dormant. And that's one of the problems that we have with not good sleep, or taking a long time for our bodies to heal from wounds, that sort of thing. Well, he came up with the X39 that tells your body again to activate the stem cells. And the one of the The crazy thing with that one is, somebody told me just a few weeks ago, Steve, you look younger. I looked at a picture of you online and you actually look younger. So, speaking of pictures, just going to show you a couple of real quick pictures. Here's a young man. He was in a snow skiing accident. You can see in only 5 days how much better he was. Here's a gentleman that was in a car accident, and you can see the scar or the wound on the left picture. On the far right hand side, hand was almost severed, and in 63 days, you can barely see the scars. Here's a young fella, teenager, who got his finger caught in the door and cut the end of his fingertip off. Mom and dad scooped up the fingertip, took him to the hospital, insisting they sew it back on. The doctor said it's not going to do any good. He used the X39 patches, and in 2 months, he had full use of his finger. Back to the appearance thing, you can see the woman on the left-hand side. Well, it's the same woman, but on the left-hand side, you can definitely see her age. And the longer she wore the patches, the less you can see the effects of the aging process. So if you'd like information about the LifeWave patches, and there are a number of different patches, but this one specifically is the one that we talk about the most, because it stimulates our stem cells and actually literally reverses the aging process. And we have scientific proof that shows that it actually does reverse the aging process. So, Ray, let's go back to you for a brief moment.
Well, the scientific proof that we have is I'm actually a customer of LifeWave, and when I forget to put the patch on my hip, I'm in pain. When I don't forget to put the patch on, I'm pain free. So no,
Yeah.
it is definitely something that helps a lot of people.
Yeah.
If we could bring Tammy back on, and our next question for you, I think Steve, you've
Yeah,
got this one.
Tammy, what can we as non-clinicians, what can the average population do to help people as they are dealing with the more so the aftermath after the suicide has taken place? What can we do to help people?
Be kind and supportive.
Okay.
Listen.
Okay.
Don't tell people that if you feel like if somebody is grieving too long, don't tell them that. everybody's grief is different. Everybody takes a different road. With this, I mean, for me, it's never going to be over. My co-host and I went to a seminar. One of the leading grief specialists in the country, and he has a saying that there's no such thing as closure. Closure is for windows and doors. So just be kind to people. Let them grieve, the way they need to. It's unhealthy if you don't. That's where we come into like lost survivors are at a 400 times greater risk for suicide than the general public. That's huge. And one suicide death can affect minimally, on the average, 139 people. That's a lot of pain. You just need to be supportive and be there and listen. Let them do what they need to do safely, of course, and just keep an eye out for the signs. Learn. Don't be afraid to learn something new. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask them about the person that they lost. I think one of the things I like most is talking about my husband. He was a great guy, and he didn't just go away. It's funny. I had a couple times, and a couple people understood where I was coming from, but they would call Bobby my ex-husband, and I'm like, no, he's not my ex-husband. He was never an ex anything, and he never will be. But that's not a term you use when you lose somebody, and it boggled my mind. But quite frankly, it happened to me when I lost my first husband too. But I was just like, that's not what you say. You need to be kind and supportive and help where you can. Sometimes you can't do anything but just sit there with a person, and that's fine. But don't dismiss what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Sure.
It's a loss like no other. I mean, I don't want to say anybody else's tragic loss is not as bad as mine, but I can tell you that it's way different. And the reason I can is because, like I told you, I've experienced 2 different tragic losses, and they are completely different. The suicide loss is much, much harder than knowing how my first husband was killed by a careless driver versus not knowing for sure why my husband decided to end his life.
Understand that. Understand.
And with us, it's like there's a couple of things. A parent who loses a child to suicide, and we had mentioned before the stigma, the guilt, that's put on by us, but it's also put on to us by society. Yeah. Parents will feel, I was supposed to be able to protect my child, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
And that comes from inside, but it also comes from society. For me, it's like, you were with this man for 30 years and you didn't know he was going to do this? No, I could have never imagined.
Yeah.
And that's why if we get past I used to say, in the 60s, we never talked about breast cancer or, whatever throughout the next decades. But still today, there is a huge stigma and people don't want to talk about suicide. And in the last 30 years, since the national organizations have started, not 1 year in the last 30 years has there been a drop in the suicide rate. Not 1 year.
Well, one of the things that, we just have we have somebody on our Facebook feed. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a former police officer. And he agrees that we should talk about it to as many people as he can. And because of mental health issues in our communities, that a lot of law enforcement, they are getting some extended training that's called CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team. But I don't know if that is sent out to the training is for every officer or if it's for a handful of officers. And I don't know if every department offers this to the officers. And I hope they do. But I think there is more traction as far as people talking about it, but not nearly enough. I mean, if you look at the bullying situation, bullying will never go away. All the schools that I've worked with are mandated to have some type of an anti-bully program in place. But guess what? They're still bullying.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. And talking about the officers here in Pasco County, we were fortunate that when we just had our major fundraiser a couple of weeks ago, Pasco County Sheriff's Office started a mental health unit, and they came out to our event. We try to get other community partners to work together so that we all know what each other's doing. My foundation alone isn't going to stop this. Another foundation alone isn't going to stop this. The sheriff's officer, please, they're not going to stop it. We all have to work together. It is a community issue. It has to be solved by multiple organizations because we can't do it all. For instance, another organization that we partner with, Ian's Way, they're geared more towards the prevention side, and it's the teen prevention side. Jennifer, who started it, lost her 16-year-old son to suicide 3 years ago. So we partner with them a lot. They were also at our event so that we can get people to know, who's out there in the community that we can get help from or that we can send to get you the help that you need. And our sheriff's department has come a long way since I lost my husband.
Yes, I'm sure there's a lot of police.
And it's an issue. Unfortunately, it's an issue all across the board. It's not something that is a problem in one police department and not another. This is stuff that they see every day. They live it every day. We don't.
Tammy, I've got a very good friend that used to be with the Fort Worth, Texas Fire Department, and he was one of the grief counselors. And I remember years ago, 20 plus years ago, when we had the Oklahoma City bombing, that my friend Phil was one of the ones that was dispatched to go up and help with the grief counseling as anybody needed help. So he was available there for several days. And that sort of thing is great, but I'm putting different things on here on the screen. We've got the Bobby White Foundation for Suicide Loss Survivor, and you've got other things. You've got a Facebook page. You've got Hope in the Light of Suicide. Tell us a little bit about Hope in the Light of Suicide. What is that?
Hope in the Light of Suicide is our streaming show with Area 52 Media Group. We just changed names, so I have to think about it. John Gaston is our producer. It's the show we tape every week. We have, I think, 77 episodes available. Where my co-host Bonnie and I, we talk candidly about what's going on. We want people to know that you can talk about it. It's hard. It's hard to do every week because, like with the foundation, you live it every day. You're not only, living with the death of someone you love so much, but you're living with what you're trying to do to help others. We've been doing this show for almost 2 years. December will be 2 years without any sponsors. We really need sponsors for our show so that we can continue to do it. But the show can be found on our website. We have a Facebook or a page on our website that all episodes are available on demand. It streams live every Saturday night at 7:00 on Facebook, YouTube, I don't know, across like 6 different platforms. And then, we put the information on our Facebook page, and it actually, on our Facebook page, it streams on the Foundation Facebook page and Hope in the Light of Suicide Facebook page.
Excellent.
But you can get, like I said, you can get to all of the episodes on demand through our website.
And Tammy, we have your email address scrolling at the bottom of the page. Is that the best way to get in touch with you?
It's a good way.
Okay.
It's a good way. That, or you can either, you can always call me at 727-859-3768. But you can also, message me through any of our Facebook pages. Also, you can get a hold of me, that way. So.
But obviously, if there is a crisis situation, if there's an emergency, you don't want people to call you. You want people to call 911.
If there is an extreme crisis at hand, call 911. Yeah. There is a new National Suicide Lifeline. We had the 800 number is still a good number, but in July they released a 3-digit number, 988, which you can call or text that number to get connected with someone that can help. With your situation, and that is available nationally. Excellent. And it is a call or text number.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right.
Tammy, thank you very much. You have been a wealth of information today.
I appreciate you guys having me on. We need to talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a tragedy for what you have gone through and what other people have gone through, but for what you're doing to continue the memory of your husband and help other people that are survivors of people who, I don't want to say the word. You're so trained to say commit suicide, and it's hard to untrain using that language.
It's gonna take a lot, but we need to do it.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So for those of you, please like, follow, and comment on our Facebook page. If you go to our YouTube page, please subscribe and share.
Yes.
Leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing with Taboo Talk with Ray and Steve. Tammy, again, thank you very much for agreeing to come on our show and sharing a little bit about your life and your life with your husband and what that's done for you and what you're doing with it to help people.
Thank you.
Commend you very much, very highly for doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And that is all the time we have for today's program, folks. As Ray said, like, share, comment, and follow us. Subscribe, Facebook, and on YouTube. We will see you next week for another very informative program on Taboo Talk with Ray and Steve. Y'all have a blessed day. Bye for now.